call the meeting to order. The select board meeting for October 29th, 2018. We are being recorded and broadcast by Minuteman Media Network, so please all speak up. We have the consent agenda, the town accounting warrants, gift acceptance of Concord Free Public Library of $1,500 to the library gift account, Saturday or Sunday entertainment license, development strategy consultants of November the 4th, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. at 57 All Road to 9 Acre Corner. The theater, one-day special licenses, Patricia Woodard, November 17th, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., 40 Westwood Road, Wine and Malt. AMG Funds, November 27th, 6 to 9 p.m., 40 Westford Road, Wine and Malt. Development Strategy Consultants, November 2nd, 3rd, 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., 57 Ornac, Wine and Malt. And November 4th, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., 57 Ornac, Wine and Malt. And we're reissuing a license for Thoreau School PPG, 7 p.m. to 11 p.m., 37 Lexington Road. We had done this last time, a wine and malt, and apparently they want all alcohol. So we are doing an all alcohol now. With that, I'll turn it over to the town manager's report.
Move to approve the
Oh,
consent
yes,
agenda.
we got it.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The town clerk informed me today that the special legislation that we needed to remedy the notice of the special town meeting on October 1st was approved by the House today. So both the Senate and the House have approved it. It is, I believe, sitting on the governor's desk awaiting his signature. So we hope later this week that legislation has been enacted. Again, that relates to the 13 days notice we provided rather than the required 14 days prior to the October 1st special town meeting. Finance Committee's guideline subcommittee has issued a preliminary guideline for the town budget. It's an additional $1 million of new spending, or 4.13% above the current year's spending allowance. So that's helpful and appreciative. I'm scheduled to meet with the guideline subcommittee on November 8th, so a week from Thursday, to expand further on what services could be provided. They've also asked for my estimate of what a level services budget would cost. So we'll have that conversation on November 8th. The work on the intersection at Commonwealth Ave and Main Street is continuing. They've moved the curb back, so you get a better sense now for where the curb is going to really sharply remove about 12 feet of the curb line. So, and I think they're rushing to try to get that done this fall. There was a power outage on Saturday night, untimely in the middle of the World Series. It was about over 1,050 customers were impacted. Took a little while to locate it because it was at night, and it affected a wide area in West Concord. Ultimately, the damage was caused by a transformer tap wire. And lastly, the planning board had a meeting on October 23rd. They are continuing their review of the PRD at 1440 and 1450 Main Street, discussing a wide variety of issues with the applicant, and also looked at a conceptual 22-lot subdivision plan as an alternative to the 36-unit PRD. And the planning board is also discussing a variety of zoning bylaw amendments that they may be putting on the warrant for action. And that's all I have.
Do you have any questions? Or?
I do. When will we see some budget information from you?
So I think we'll, my suggestion to the chair would be the first meeting in December. We could do it, since we open November 5th and November 19th. The 19th is a little early for that, so I think your first meeting in December, if that's agreeable, we can have a preliminary discussion before the budget is really finalized in early January, if that's agreeable.
Any other questions or comments?
No, just I'd like to, well, interrupt the World Series.
I want to thank those who attended the October 20th forum on effective governance for town committees, boards, and commission volunteers. There was a committee handbook produced by the town clerk's office that has substantial amount of useful information and updated discussion of the open meeting law is available to the public, and any suggestions as to how to make future forums on town government better, if that's even possible, are welcome. While our annual town meeting does not begin until April 8th, much preparation, as you've heard, is already in the works. The Finance Committee has begun working on budget guidelines for the school and the town. A number of committees have begun working on warrant articles. The town meeting preview meeting will take place on December 1st, and draft warrant articles are due on December 10th. The date for town meeting warrants close at 4 p.m. on January the 3rd. I'd urge any citizens who's planning on submitting a warrant article for the town meeting to bring their proposed article before the appropriate town committee for the committee to review and offer their input and possible endorsement. Tonight, the board will be reviewing and discussing a report from the Affordable Housing Funding Committee. This committee was established by the board as a result of a warrant article submitted at last year's annual town meeting that had not had the benefit of a review by a town committee. The Affordable Housing Funding Committee has presented us with a thoughtful and thorough report that urge all town citizens to review. The report reviews a wide range of possible funding sources and solutions for developing affordable housing. Creating and maintaining housing for a wide range of income people is a challenge not only for Concord, but for many parts of the state and country. We'll also be hearing tonight from the town planning and land management director, Marcia Rasmussen, regarding possible large housing developments in our neighboring towns of Acton and Sudbury. These possible developments may also impact affordable housing in Concord. Early voting for the town elections up and running, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. This Thursday, it's open until 7 p.m. And on Friday, November 2nd, they open early in the morning at 7 a.m. And on this Saturday, it's going to be open for voting at 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. While I don't like to bring national events into the select board meeting, I believe it's appropriate for us to have a moment of silence in memory of those who lost their lives in the shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh during this past Saturday. So I'd ask a moment of silence. Thank you. We now have the request to install paddle access signs on town property.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Julia Kane, Natural Resources Director for the town, and Julia Carana, Development Director with ORS. Thanks.
We had this on the agenda at the last meeting, but thought it would be better to have a brief presentation just so questions could be answered. But if you
Sure.
could give us a brief presentation.
I'll
we
give
do
you a
have
very
the letter,
brief,
which is
great,
helpful.
thank you. I'll give you a very brief overview. ORS received a grant to install paddler access signs to bring awareness to the public of where they can put in for kayaks and canoes, and Julia has an example of these 8x8 signs, what they would look like. And we had talked about possible locations where these might be helpful to raise awareness for the public, and came up with 4 locations. The first at Pine Street, second at Dino's at 1153 Main Street, where there are 4 undedicated canoe access spaces there. 36A Baker Ave, which is sort of across the street behind the Citizens Bank, where we're constructing a new boat launch this fall, and then at the Lowell Road boat launch. So those are the 4 locations that we had thought would be helpful to provide this information to the public. And I know that the Select Board has concerns about a proliferation of signs, and so what we sort of looked at was what would make the most sense in terms of where those signs would be located. Now, there are at Pine Street and at Lowell Road, there are existing signs that say, they indicate that you're coming up to the Assabet River in the case of Pine Street, and then the Concord River in the case of Old Calf or Lowell Road. So in an effort to reduce the sign proliferation, Julie and I talked about it and thought that it would make sense at the Pine Street location to affix 2 of these signs back to back on one of the existing river access signs. And that's on one side of this graphic that I will pass around. And at Lowell Road, those river signs are about 225 feet apart, and they're not very close to where the boat launch is. And so it would seem that it would make the most sense, if the board is inclined to approve an additional sign, to place that sign right at the access point where you come down off Lowell Road to access the boat launch there.
Because the riverside's on Lowell, signs are on the
So, I'm sorry?
wrong side of the street on Lowell Road, right?
Exactly. It would be on the other side of the street from where the boat launch is on Lowell Road.
Any questions?
So, my question about the Lowell Road side is that it's a pretty obvious boat launch. It's parked with cars starting early in the morning, and there's only one road that gets you down to the river. You can't go any other place. The others I understand because they're not well marked. They're dedicated parking spaces behind Pine Street, that people don't know that there's an access point. This one's pretty obvious, so I was wondering if we really need a sign in a place that's an obvious boat launch.
I think it's, what I like about it is that it's sort of a universal sign, so that everyone knows this is an actually official put-in. So,
And the roadway doesn't look like it.
the roadway does look like it. I
literally
think the
is a
roadway
road.
does, it's just trying to be consistent with all our put-ins, and that this is a put-in. I do agree with you, and so I think it's the least important, because people will see that it's there. We've been trying to put them throughout the watershed so that people can know where an access is, but sometimes there's like 2 places on the sides of the river people can go in, and they're causing a lot of erosion by using both places rather than one that we maintain or have people maintain. So this isn't really an issue there, it's just we're trying to have it be consistent.
How are you designating the difference between a boat launch and parking? Because, for instance, on Lowell Road, the boat launch is, you put in and then you park elsewhere, whereas on Pine Street and Dino's and Baker Ave, it may be a different setup. I'm just talking about, if these signs are intended to clarify use and access, and as a, like the Truth and Justice Squad of my house would be, yeah, but where do we park, I'm not sure we could do, we can put the boat in, but what do we do now?
So what we have done is we have, I didn't bring our maps, but we have these maps of all the rivers, but we also have them online. And online it goes, and for each point you can see, and we have this written in the maps, we can see and we tell them there's 2 parking places here or 4 here, and usually there's places not far away people can go to park. But that's sort of the paddlers, they have to figure out more then, but we do indicate how much there is.
And we do have,
Couple of paddlers actually park on Lowell Road and carry the boats down.
Yeah.
No, I understand, Lowell Road.
Or go down and take them off and move the
I'm
cars up.
thinking
That's
more
what we
about
do for trips.
Pine Street,
right, so
Baker Ave, and Dino's.
Okay, so Dino's, there are 2 undedicated parking spaces there that have Cs that indicate sort of obliquely that paddlers can use those, and I think this sign will help indicate that that's what those are there for. At 36 Baker Ave, we are constructing a small parking area, 2 spaces, 3 spaces that will be visible from the street. I'm sorry?
Pine Street, you can.
Oh, at Pine Street, there is at the pullout, there is an area where you can park off the street.
Well, I
It's-
understand, I've seen cars there, it's just never clear to me that that's legal.
It's-
I mean,
Yeah,
it's,
that's,
just because a car's there doesn't.
Right.
I'm just curious.
yeah, having a
Right.
sign there saying it's an access hopefully will indicate that to people, and then if they go look at our maps or anything, they will see that it's legal.
And I'm trying to visualize, I don't think there are no parking signs on Pine Street, and most people, I think, will take will assume if it's not posted no parking, that parking is permitted.
I must say, I thought that having the sign on the Lowell Road, if you don't, my concern would be if people are used to seeing a sign as a location and sort of permission, that having the absence of it may create just confusion as to whether they're not familiar. And I must say, I don't find that type of a sign nearly as offensive as one that's got all sorts of writing or on it that you've got to slow down to read or whatever. I was a little concerned that the paddle didn't have a paddle, though.
I know, yeah. This is the sort of universal sign that you see all over the country, actually, so I stuck with something very, that people know, yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Are we ready for a motion?
Okay. I'm okay with the Lowell Road, I just wanted to at least acknowledge that it couldn't handle any more cars than the ones that are there. But I would move to support the ORS and RC request to install paddler access signs located on town-owned land as described in the request dated September 26, 2018. The signage shall be installed at a time and date determined favorable to Concord Public Works, who will be doing the installation. ORS and NRC shall be responsible for the periodic inspection, maintenance, and replacement of any damaged signs.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, ready to move on the Giroux land update. Good evening.
Hi there. I'm Kate Hodges, Assistant Town Manager,
Ryan Orr, Facilities Director.
and Ryan Kane, our Recreation Director, is here as well, but there's a Recreation Commission meeting in the hearing room, so he'll be coming in, I assume, as he hears questions, if any, that pertain to him. So, okay. Sorry, it's a little...
Maybe we should turn down the window.
yeah.
I like this one here,
But I would see that one.
I'm sure you do.
I couldn't move though.
Are folks able to see that all right? Yep, okay. So we're just presenting a very brief overview. Some of these slides might be familiar because we went over a few of these at the last public hearing, but after acquiring the Giroux property in July, we issued a fairly comprehensive RFP for feasibility study and design analysis for the Giroux property. The focus areas that we wanted to highlight were the planning of the park and the surrounding needs for less typical types of recreation amenities, which include those that were categorized as passive or non-conventional active recreation. We wanted to make sure that access to the park was safe and obvious while maintaining a woods-like feel. We also wanted to have a place to walk, sit, fish, launch non-motorized boats, and enjoy nature. Greenman Peterson Incorporated, also known as GPI Inc., was hired as our chosen firm. They began their work by taking a comprehensive look at the existing conditions and how those were for the property and how they may be best used in conjunction with the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, which you can see is marked above by a dotted yellow line. Their findings, for those who may not have been able to yet tour the property, are shown above. The most western part of the property is the most densely wooded area and essentially creates a ridge between the park parcel and the adjacent farmland owned by the state. The pine forest located in the center of the parcel has an area in the middle which has obviously been disturbed, although several years ago. When looking into the history of the property, it seems that an old railway bed cut through the northern part of the property area within this pine forest and was once mined for gravel and sand for some of the adjacent properties. So there's a pretty large divot in the middle of what is the pine forest. We're calling it a disturbance. This graphic depicts the natural site drainage. As you can see, the green area shows some pretty steep banks and sloping areas. The water naturally drains along the embankment, culminating at the cove area seen in that last photo, which is also within the pine forest. And the bulk of the cleared area has a slope of a little bit more than 3%. So it's a slow and gentle way down into the cove area. The area in the pine forest is much steeper. It has about an 8% slope and is lined with down trees and other conditions which, if we were to remedy completely, would disturb several acres of the natural forest. So it was decided to keep this area primarily as is and to improve its overall walkability with some marked trails and a few natural benches. This photo is from our town's GIS system, and it simply is here to show the 25-foot no disturb area and the 50-foot no build zone, which are conditions within the natural resources guidelines. So work in these areas will only be done in a manner that decreases erosion and helps to aid in the preservation of the park and pond as natural resources for our community. The red lines and bullets above represent the existing utility poles on the property. The purple lines to the right show the existing drainage and stormwater management. The purple line to the left-hand side of the drawing indicated where there's an existing 30-inch concrete drainage pipe belonging to the Mass DOT. That's where that pipe is located. It runs under Route 2 and daylights into Warner's Pond in the Cove area. So while working on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail project, the town asked MassDOT if they would include an alternate type of stormwater management plan for this draining as part of their Bruce Freeman Phase 2B. Unfortunately, as GPI looked into the existing pipe a bit more, it was found that the depth of the pipe located in the Giroux land, coupled with the prevailing grades, make it really challenging to daylight the pipe. Its location is in the center of the pine forest, and it's more than 12 feet underground. Unearthing it to make the necessary stormwater changes would take a large area of the park. It would eliminate the scoring that has kept a section of the pond completely clear. Therefore, it was determined that the best course of action would be to keep the pipe as is, and when the state begins their work on the Route 2 project, they consider a new drainage and unification pond along the westbound side of the Route 2, closer to the state police force barn. I don't know why this isn't working. Oh, great. There's been a great deal of talk surrounding the existing home on the property. The town's plan is to recycle the home as was done with the Anderson property home that was adjacent to the Rideout Park. Kate Hanley, our sustainability director, has been working with CPW. They believe we'd be able to recycle more than 90% of this home. So we plan to issue an RFP for those services prior to this calendar year's end. In looking at the idea of moving the home to another location on the property, our facilities director, Ryan Orr, considered the following very big ticket items which would need to be addressed to use the existing home. So I thought I'd let him present that.
So, I mean, looking at the home a little closer, it's tough to tell in the picture here, but it's in need of a new roof. It's in need of new siding, although it is vinyl siding. It's probably the first vinyl siding ever produced. So there's no match to it to repair anything that's broken or that will be broken during the move. A lot of the windows, or most of the windows, they look like regular windows in this picture, but if you were to actually go walk through the home, you'd see that they're actually storm windows, would need to be completely replaced. So I'm kind of going, I didn't really go off of what she's got here. It was more our discussion. All the egress from all the landings leaving the home, concrete landings, including the bulkhead, would all have to be left behind and reproduced again after moving the house. including that one roof that you can see that's overhanging. That wouldn't be supported anymore. That would have to be removed off the house and put back on. Doors as well are pretty old. They're probably 30 years old, 20 to 30 years old. Very likely we'd be replacing them. All the mechanicals in the building, the boiler, a water heater, well pump, everything else, all of that would need to be replaced. It's lived its full life pretty much already.
Okay, so
And then also we have, the other thing we noticed the other day going through was also everything in the house is cast iron. It's not gonna be able to support itself in the move. So basically all ventilation in the house will have to be removed and upgraded to PVC once the house is moved. So there's a lot to the house that's gonna need to be rebuilt.
So what we provided here was just a preliminary cost estimate that we did in conjunction with Liz Rust from the RHSO. We have a local price, which is what we would pay as private citizens, and then we have a 30B price, and that would be if we have to pay prevailing wage. So it tends to be pretty cost prohibitive for that. It's also important to note that the home would need to meet the state standards for affordable housing. Sorry. And while they are loose when it comes to the conversion of existing homes, the state does not want homeowners to be saddled with excessive maintenance issues. So the general guideline is that things would need to be replaced if they have a life of less than 5 to 10 years left. And we would say that most of this home meets that. Moving on.
Just Kate,
Yes.
just go ahead. It says 30B at the top of that column.
Right, which is the Mass General Law prevailing wage and
Thank you.
procurement rules. I'm sorry, I should have said that better. So this photo was taken from the new parking lot along Commonwealth Ave, which is actually standing on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail parking lot, in an effort to create a more home-like property that would include what we consider to be a proper backyard. We asked that the entrance to Jarrell be moved from its current driveway location and relocated upwards. This would have better vehicle access, pedestrian and bike access, parking, and boat drop-off. You can see from the photos above that the proposed affordable housing lot is approximately a half an acre. The home is shown as a rectangle on the property and is beyond the 50-foot no-build zone with ample side lot that abuts the part. The dimensions shown here are basically spec'd out for the adjacent home, so a home like one that was in the neighborhood would be able to fit here within the 50-foot buffer. We drew it in here and changed the shading a bit so you could see what would be considered as the house lot. And the right-hand photo is the proposed new driveway, changing the drive from the existing one, which is shown in red, to the one that's in green. Has a better and more aesthetically pleasing home site, and it also has a more park-like feel. It's also easier for traffic and line of sight. While most of the site will mirror that of a wooded park setting, the restroom facility is necessary. So the above photos show you a typical layered composting toilet, which is what we would propose for the site. The photo on the top right is a composting facility at the Concord Country Club. And the green box pictured on the bottom right is the actual bin, which is housed under that facility that you see above it. We also hope to construct a boardwalk along the shoreline, which will help with both erosion control and access to the water's edge for fishing and wildlife viewing. The red line here depicts where we hope to construct and situate a boardwalk. The area immediately in front of the existing home has a steep drop-off Knowing that one of the main draws to the property in the area surrounding this shoreline, our thought was to provide a way for people to access the waterfront and to enjoy it but not contribute or negatively affect any further erosion to the shoreline. So some type of open boardwalk which is fully accessible to all those who wish to use it, we hope to have as the focal point. The picture at the top right shows what it may look like. Those are ones without sides. And the one on the bottom just shows the steep bank and within the do not disturb. So with all this in mind, we created the initial discussion plan, which you can see above. The plan was discussed in more detail at the walkthrough and then at the public meeting, again held on October 16th, where we heard from several interested folks on the design scheme. One of the things that people wanted was a bit more green space, a bit less hardscape, some varied parking. We heard a lot of interest in playgrounds, picnic tables, some blazed paths, and a real love of the boardwalk idea. So there you can see the open meadow, playground, some of the things that we were talking about as amenities. What we've come up with the updated context was a more truncated version. The updated property schematic is shown, includes many new or altered features, including a reduced asphalt, shrunken driveway. If I can go switch back between the two, you can see this is a little bit more hardscape. Here it's a little bit more truncated, which allows for a bit more green space in that pine and forest area. Small parking area for pond viewing for vehicles. You can see that right here. This was kind of a thought that we had, that perhaps you want to drive in off of Commonwealth Ave and sip your coffee and just look at the pond, and you can do that here, whereas the bulk of the parking would be here. The majority of all the parking, bulk parking, is here along the northern edge. This would be a nice drop-off area, as we're trying to have people drop off canoes and kayaks and other things, either here for ADA accessibility or down on a zero-depth beach that we have area right here, which is near this cove. So this would be both a turnaround for emergency vehicles, a turnaround for general pedestrian traffic, and then a drop-off location. There's an increase here for wooded trails. More programming space here within the eastern end of the property, better park entrance feeling, and room to expand upon all the pathways. I think we all know that to get everything that we want in a park from start to finish is going to be a multi-year process and a multi-phased funding process. And so the thought was, this is a very attainable goal that we can have, and then should we find out that we need more parking or we need more play space, we do have this area to work with, but we're not starting with something that's so large and unmanageable that when we neither can finish the project nor can we maintain it. Item number 14 that you'll see right here is that affordable housing unit, the potential site. Again, it's about a half an acre, situated within the 50-foot no build with about a 10-foot real backyard, side yard type of feel. We also noticed when we were out there looking at the site that there's a sewer manhole cover in front of 367 and 369 Commonwealth Ave. So in measuring it from where we might be able to put a home to the manhole cover, it's about 210 feet. So it might be possible to connect. That's actually a third of what we thought the distance was going to be. So if that's something that the housing folks want to be able to cost out, I think it would be a much more manageable number. So our next step after tonight is tomorrow we're going to be discussing our CPA application with that group. And then we are going to solicit one final round of input and thoughts on this updated project. We're going to try to do some of that online and via social media to try to generate a little bit more from folks who might not be able to come out for evening meetings. We're also going to do some things inside the rec programs with the after school and try to tap into some of those parents who might be interested. And then we will produce a final rendering, which we hope to move to the construction phase drawings with an actual cost estimate.
Phew. Impressive. Bicycle racks are going to be how many and where?
Well, I don't know how many, but the thought was that we would clearly want some kind of rack structure here, which is this is the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, and so we would have kind of this grand entrance. We would call this a on foot or pedal power entrance that's here. That we would have something, and then we'd have probably another over here where the parking area is. What's interesting about creating a park where there wasn't one is that we're not going to know what we're missing until we're missing it. So if people are really, heavily using here and not this kind of grand entrance, then it may be that we need to move a bike rack or two. But I think we'd at least start with probably 2 in this primary location and another over here. But nothing that we do. Those are easy. You can pick them up and move. Well, I say that, and I say, Ryan, can you pick that up and move it? So maybe it isn't so easy, but it is in my mind. But we'll be looking at site amenities, benches, and things like that. Are sort of we have to put them where we think people are going to congregate, and then after we're there and we hear the feedback, then we move them or not. So.
Questions?
So I have a couple of questions about, the existing house, how old is the house and assuming that the utilities haven't been updated and the kitchen hasn't been updated, so we're talking in 1920 cells?
No, it was 19, yeah, I think it was 53 or 54, yep.
So the systems in there, you're saying, pretty old?
Most of them are original.
Yeah, I don't know if they're really from 1950, but they're certainly beyond their 15 to 20 year life expectancy of most.
If I remember reading your conversation, there was a possibility of the house that's on Commonwealth Avenue just before the property is a Concord Housing Authority house.
Yes.
Was there a discussion about whether it was possible to build that onto that one as opposed to another single family house? Or?
We as the town we speculated that. I believe the initial conversations that we had with and I'm going to ask Marcia Rasmussen too, because she was involved in that conversation. They were, that group was less interested in building on and more interested in the standalone. I don't think, and I think also we were having a little bit of an issue of figuring out how you would fit that here within that 50-foot no build, which doesn't make it something that can't happen.
And just recall that we're not able to subdivide the land. That's part of the restriction on the property. So there would be no way of transferring the land from Giroux to the housing authority. So the alternative is to consider a 99-year lease of the property, and that would overcome the ability to transfer it. But then we'd run into issues with zoning if you have to straddle a property line.
I know it's probably premature, but you had mentioned, and you've mentioned before too, that this will be a multi-phase sort of activity, given the funding and the whole, everything involved in this. Do you have a sense yet, when will you have a sense of what the phasing would look like? What comes first? I mean, probably restrooms, I don't know anything about making a park, but it would be nice at some time in the future to have a phased
Yes.
approach to this, and with some price tags on it.
Sure. Well, some of that will depend on the various applications that we put in both to the capital plan and for CPA. So depending on funding is number one. So I guess you all will let me know. The other thing is, number one is, and although it's not glamorous, is sort of the hardscapes, because one of the things that you do when you're creating a new park is how do you get there, how do you park, and what do you need as far as pedestrian access. And so it would make sense if we're going to mobilize in order to create driveways and pathways that we would do all of the sort of hardscape that we're interested in doing. The other ones that we're looking at is, grading, loaming, seeding, and the boardwalk, I think would be a big one, mostly for both the environmental impact that has, and also because that really meets with our sustainability planning for park impact. And so it's one of the things that we'd be looking at. The plantings, although, lovely, can be phased. And a lot of the plants that I had been looking at, and I did some planting schemes that I've been talking about with the consultants, are pretty low cost, low maintenance. They can be mounded, treescapes and things like that. And they can come, a year, 2 years, 3 years into the project. And then amenities would be the other one. I think the, more expensive items, playgrounds, depending on how big you want it, that can be, a couple of $100,000. So I think that might be its own phase. And it might be that we do some fundraising efforts or some efforts like that are about one certain part of that.
I know it would be, I know you're going to apply for grants both locally and at state level, wherever you can. I know you do that. But I would really like to see, you've mentioned sort of the hardware or whatever it's called. I'd like to see some kind of phased plan, and independent of where the money comes from, how much money is going to be needed to get phase one done, meaning the roads and whatever, and then grading is two. We would likely have to go to the town, and we might have to go to the town multiple years for some kind of support for this, so it'd be good, I think, as we further develop this, to start planning on sort of seeing that, so we can start talking about it and build the kind of support that will be, I think, important if we want the town to continue to be supportive of this project.
Yep.
And I think related to that, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't you have some funds initially to begin the process?
So we have the funds that we had to purchase the property, and we are using the rest of that money, which was about $200,000, to pay for the feasibility and design. Once we have a final design, that will come with a cost analysis. We can't really cost out too much until we have a final design. So what you're looking at, I believe, is as close to it as we can come, but we will have something that will come with a price tag with all of that. The other monies that are left over after we pay for that, we're hoping to use for the recycling of the home that's there, and to sort of get the site prepped and ready for the construction season, which would then be, soon after town meeting.
And then do you have an estimate for the recycling if it goes?
I don't at this time. My understanding was it was about $90,000 or so for the Anderson property. That had a few unique hiccups in it, so it could be less than that, but I think we're trying to budget, or at least estimate, on the high side.
The other question I have, sort of related to the feasibility study and the timeline, would also be what portion, if any, of the Giroux property will be accessible while this, in other words, there'll be trails, it is a wooded space. Is this something that until we're finished with, it's still, not unlike the Bruce River Rail Trail, attractive, beckon, but you can't go in there until we're ready?
So I don't know the answer to that from a public safety standpoint, and I think that would be a discussion to have with the police chief and the fire chief, and understand their comfort level, because that's their business, and then maybe have a discussion of if we could open up some part.
The trails in the back or something. I'm just thinking that because
Sure.
it's it's one of the ways we sustain interest is to let people come and see.
Yes.
I would ask the same question, like when we think the first kids could come over here
Yeah.
and, put their feet in or walk the trail.
I'll have to get back to you, because I don't know, but it's a great question, and something that we absolutely should be thinking about. So.
We start with play structure when you first open space, so we get kids in there early.
We have a big agenda tonight, but I will open up for a public comment if there's one or two that would like to make a statement at this time. If not, we can move right along to the Verizon wireless update.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
That was great.
Chief, also doing the Verizon
Good.
wireless update. So I was saving my thank you to later.
Okay, you're awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I don't have a great deal more to report from the last time that we met, other than if Marcia would like to come up, because I've pulled her into this as well.
She's leaving.
I guess not.
That's not in keeping with the team spirit.
Sorry about that. Somebody left their purse behind.
Oh, okay. So I can tell you that we met and discussed with the members of the Verizon team, their attorney and their site analyst, and they had said that they were willing to look at the Keyes Road site again, but that they had some pretty strong feelings that it would not be fruitful, but that they wanted to be able to exhaust, all possibilities. And I think Marcia and her team presented a great deal of information that.
The Historic Districts Commission was the group that initially denied the approach back in 2012, 10. And so we thought we would start with the Historic Districts Commission. And Heather Gill, the staff planner that works with the commission, suggested that we have a preliminary conversation with, have Verizon come in, talk, maybe do some initial balloon test, look at the application as it had been submitted previously, look at the decision that was determined previously, to see if the Historic District Commission would be able to view the project differently, to see what we might do differently. But the other piece that has changed is that the site is now entirely within the floodplain. FEMA updated its mapping of the Concord and Sudbury River. What we believed previously, we thought that there were some places along the site where were above the floodplain. Unfortunately, we're now entirely within. So they would have to go to a Board of Appeals process for that as well. And there's no location to mitigate that flood impact. But again, they would assess that as part of this effort to determine whether it would be feasible to go to Keyes Road.
So at the end of that meeting, Attorney Duval, who is the attorney for Verizon, had said that their next course of action for the town-owned property would be to file a formal letter to the Historic Districts Commission asking that if they were to submit an application either similar or the same as the one that was submitted some number of years ago, would the HDC even entertain that, or are they saying we've denied this once, we'll deny it twice? And if they have any indication that the HDC would entertain it, then they would move ahead. And they did bring their engineer down, and Marcia walked the property with them.
We reviewed a couple of sites. We felt that there might be an alternative that would be closer to 141 Keyes Road. Previously, the application had it at the back of the property, behind 135, which is the water and sewer building, where it was closer to the Sudbury River. And one of the concerns had been, at that time, views from the Sudbury River, that it would change that view shed that you have of the river grasses that are along the Nashottic Road area. So we felt that bringing it closer to 141 Keyes, it might be better hidden, not putting it so that it would be visible from Keyes Road, but sort of halfway between the two.
Additionally, Verizon has engaged the school, and they are talking to them about the possibility of siting something at the regional campus. I don't have much of an update from that, but I did put Attorney Duval in touch with a member over there, and I've said I would have as much or as little to do with that as both of those people would like, and so.
So one question I have is that maybe my memory is faulty on this. When I remember Verizon came here in front of us first, they talked about wanting something at the school and something in town. Is that still, so they're still looking for two sites?
Correct.
Okay, so if at the school that's not enough, if at Keyes Road that's not enough.
Correct.
Their first priority would be something near the high school. I think, didn't they indicate that would be their first priority, would be to locate something near the high school? The regional school committee has declined to offer to host a site.
I think they thought they would get a greater search ring from something at the high school because they'd be able to reach more of the downtown. The initial that I heard was the Kais Road campus, while it would be good, some of it would be lost to the river, which, there's not too much need for that there. So I think if you ask them to prioritize, that would probably still be the priority, but meaning the school first. But I don't know if that's subject to change.
So the site that you walked, Marcia, at 141, that's in the floodplain too, right?
Yes, it would be,
I hear
it's,
the cell phone a lot.
it's still in the floodplain, that whole site.
And who would have to issue a waiver or a?
It would be the Board of Appeals that would, yes.
My understanding from their engineers, they'd actually have to build it up first. So it, again, is, they continued to mention their love of the umbrella site. I think for ease and central location, but
And cost probably for them.
we've been thankful that they've been entertaining other options.
And again, the umbrella wouldn't be the only site, right? It's still 2 sites.
I believe they would be, yes, happy with both sites.
No, I'm not talking happy, I'm saying,
No,
can they get by on one?
side.
Yeah, is there,
There was some mixed review. There was some mixed opinions whether the umbrella site would be able to satisfy enough, at least in the immediate, because of its more centralized location. They certainly said that they would know without a shadow of a doubt that they would need both Kais Road and something at the school. The thought was if they got something a little bit closer inside the search ring, the umbrella. They also said the same about the Stowe Street flagpole in Emerson Field, that may be strong enough that they wouldn't need more than one. But the attorney said one thing, as did the real estate citer, and then the engineer said, no, I think we need, so I don't do that for work, so,
Any idea when, sort of there's gonna be a report regarding the school?
I don't know.
I don't know if Bob, you wanna come forward if you would? Thank you, Mark.
Robert
We
Grom.
missed you at our table.
Sorry?
We were so accustomed for years for you to be over there questioning.
I'll be back in the future. But Robert Grom, school committee, speaking as an individual, not for the whole committee. There have been no discussions yet between Verizon and the regional district. There are plans. We have a certain procedure at the school committee where we do research and we have a discussion and open meeting, and none of that has happened yet. So this is extremely early, and obviously we're going to look at all the alternatives and possibilities of other sites. Clearly, having it at or near a school presents its own issues, and so we're early in the process.
As far as you know, has Verizon had any contact with any of the school personnel?
It's been a situation where through email I was introduced to and the attorney at Verizon, but we haven't really gotten back to each other. So again, too early.
Okay, just circumstantially, Tom and I were at an event over by Kais Road the other day, and which I'm sure report out later in the meeting, but we noticed that there is a fairly tall pole on the Concord oil property with an antenna already on it. And I wonder if anybody, I don't recall, I'm not good at heights. Well, I know.
It was high.
It was, but it's high, and it already is just, it's back, it's back in the back part of the property, and I suspect, Chris was there as well, I suspect it was in the days when they used radios to dispatch their oil trucks. It was that kind of a tower, but it's still there, and it's pretty tall. And I wonder if we should take a look at that.
Will do.
Okay. Anybody else? Again, if anybody in the public has a quick comment to make, I'm happy to take it now, but if you don't feel the urge to do so, don't feel real need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess Marcia is discussing the large development in Acton and Sudbury.
Good evening, Marcia Rasmussen, Director of Planning and Land Management. This past year, we've been following at a distance 2 projects. The Powder Mill Place in Acton and Maynard, it is on the Acton-Maynard town line. That represents 254 units. It's going to be mixed income, and they're negotiating with both communities about the service, the provision of water supply and sewer capacity. So those are difficult issues for both communities. However, I know that the select board in Acton has entered into a memorandum of agreement for a local initiative project for the Acton portion, and that on November 7th, the Maynard Select Board will be discussing this and whether they are interested or want to follow up with the local initiative program or project status. This is a project that is off of Route 62. And so the main concern, I think, for Concord is traffic and what that means. There has been a traffic study done and a peer review of that traffic study by the town of Maynard, but they say that it's not going to impact, make it any worse. However, some of the things that I think that Concord may want to ask or make sure are included in any decision on this project is that the project participate with the Crosstown Connect. There is a shuttle service that is currently servicing the South Acton train station through Maynard. To add this as a property that goes to the South Acton train station. And then perhaps to look at making sure that all of the sidewalks connect, because there will be people who may want to take a bike or walk along Route 62 and connect to Concord sidewalks to get into Concord Center or West Concord Center. So those would be 2 aspects that I think would be very important to raise as concerns to both Acton and Maynard. Because it straddles the town lines, because it's going to be a 40B project or a comprehensive permit, that will have to go through both boards of appeals in each community. And the decisions will have to interconnect as they did for Concord Muse with the Concord decision and the Acton decision. Another aspect of the project, though, is stormwater management, making sure that the runoff doesn't negatively impact the Assabet River. This is a site that is right on the river. In the memo, we have a graphic that shows the location. So again, the Assabet River is a steeply sided river. There is a flood gauge in Maynard that we monitor regularly, and we want to make sure that that remains intact and that we aren't negatively impacting floodwaters. And then the third aspect is the question about emergency response, public safety response. With Concord Muse in close proximity, we are aware that there is an elevated response for housing like this, and we'll need to make sure that our agreements are in place for when Maynard or Acton responds to Concord and vice versa when Concord has to respond to a location like this. So I'm suggesting that the select board may want to prepare a letter or ask me, I can prepare a draft on your behalf for your signature to go to both select boards in Acton and Maynard to highlight these concerns and make sure that they get are included in part of the discussion.
Marcia, I hear your recommendations and they all sound very reasonable. I just have a question. When we're if the select board decides to submit that letter, are we asking for mitigation? Are we asking just this is our wish list, so to speak? what kind of clout do we have in making, who's receiving this besides the developer and the two towns?
Well, I can only look at what we did with Concord Muse. We had a more open process than either of these communities have had with us. We've had to go searching for the information. They haven't brought it to us the way we did with Concord Muse. And the impacts on roads as a result of Concord Muse in both Sudbury and Acton were, and because Acton had veto power through their Board of Appeals since it was partially in Acton, they were able to negotiate more mitigation than we may be eligible for. But that's why I'm raising the issue of connecting sidewalks, because I think the sidewalks are the prime, making sure that we have connectivity, that we have safe ways of people getting out of their cars and using their feet. So that's, I don't know how far we could take it, and I can explore that with both communities.
Thank you.
If both projects go forward, there'll be over 500 units?
That is correct.
And how many of those, we're talking kind of affordable, do we know what the average price of the non-affordable would be?
That I don't know at this time. I'm waiting to see what that final project proposal would be.
And the affordable ones would have a local option?
For Maynard and for Acton.
Right,
Not for
Concord.
Not for Concord, right, but I'm wondering how many might be at least available to somebody in Concord, and we're not talking an enormous distance.
So,
Usually these projects are 25 or 20% affordable, and that it depends on whether it is a moderately affordable at 80% of median or at 50% and below of median. And there was another point there. And that for local preference, you can request up to 70% of whatever number is affordable as local preference. But that has to be justified with some analysis of your community and your local need.
And is that a permanent local preference, or is it the first?
It is only the first time local
So
preference.
that's, okay,
Yes.
that's what I,
Similar to Junction.
exactly, that's what I was guessing. This is somewhat of a rhetorical question, but I find it amazing to see the projects that are coming before us, not for our input, but as a notification, consistently have little to no traffic impact. And I happen to live on 62, and I know for a fact that that's not true. I mean, just in emergency vehicle traffic alone, which again, we witness regularly, and I appreciate that we have the services we do. But that's just, I don't understand how that passes the straight face test. Yeah.
I'm not a traffic engineer, but what they are looking at is the level of service, and it's based on a timing factor. It's already bad. It's not going to be that much worse. So, I mean,
So you're not getting those Concord to at all.
and that's part of the issue with trying to make sure that they are looking at shuttle services, that they are looking at alternative means of transportation, and making sure that that is part of the decision so that they're in it for the long term. I think that is really important. It's one of the things that I wish I had known more about with Concord Muse, that we require them to have a board to share rides, to promote that within the development itself, and to participate in some kind of shuttle service to get the commuter to their destination, be it the local train station in West Concord or in South Acton, and home.
Is there any conversation between these two projects about the accumulated impact of vehicle travel or school impacts? Because you have 500 units going in, plus Concord is looking at another 36 or something.
Well, 250 in Maynard and Acton on Route 62, but the 274 are 117.
Right, so if you're going to mitigate traffic and you think, okay, you can come out of this one,
No, neither is communicating,
Right,
because
which is
Sudbury
unfortunate.
is Sudbury and
Right.
Acton is Acton
so when
and
you
Maynard
look
is
at
Maynard.
what happens to traffic, it's not a single development, it's the impact of 4 potential developments, or 3 potential developments, all within an area of constituent 117. So even if the traffic count is looking at right-hand turns on 62, if they were to then say, well, let's redirect the traffic to the left-hand turns to 117, now you're bumping up against the Sudbury project, which will be facing 117. It seems like we should be asking for better regional transportation interests, where because we deal with these project by project, and each one has an incremental increase in the traffic flow or traffic stalling, or the impacts are smaller. But when you look at the number of developments that are going in the concentrated area, the cumulative impacts can be quite significant.
So you would like to include in both Acton and Maynard letters, as well as in the Sudbury letter, that they should be talking about the traffic impacts overall and ways of mitigating that for some major intersections.
Because everyone has a piece of that
Okay.
traffic flow that at least would be a consideration.
Well, I'm wondering if there's a finer sieve to put on that, which might include what would be the impact on school traffic alone, like the hours because I think that Sudbury has every one of the towns has a stake in that in terms of the time they're delivering their kids to schools and how that, school buses, exactly.
What about the bus?
Well, but it's not just put them on the bus, I'm saying the buses themselves are not going to be delivering. I know that Concord is gonna be right in the chokehold of that because of where our buses are and where our kids have to go.
I'd rather see buses full than seeing individually driven kids.
Oh, that's a whole other conversation. I'm talking about actual bus time maintaining itself.
But I am hearing that we think a letter to each of them makes a lot of sense.
And perhaps also to DHCD, who also has some purview over the project.
Marcia, can I ask about water? I mean, we have no authority in any of these projects. I mean, the letter, I totally support that. But what about water? I mean, is there some?
At this point in time, the town of Acton has indicated that they'd be willing to provide water to the entire project. They're looking at
I was thinking more of wastewater.
wastewater, and
And the effect on wells with the Assabet River. And doesn't the Assabet, isn't it a protected river?
it is a wild and scenic river, but it's only protected up to Damon Mill. So it's Damon Mill to where it joins the
Joins the Concord.
Sudbury and
Sudbury.
Concord.
Does the river know that?
Or the water
Or the
flow.
water?
Or the watershed, no.
So there's no potential impact on,
Both communities have sewer treatment plants, and both have some capacity for managing the waste from both the projects. It's a question of which community will take the greater share of that. If Acton is willing to take its portion and Maynard is willing to take its portion, then they are not considering an on-site septic system because of its close proximity to the river. So it will go to one or both treatment plants in each community.
Good to know they have-
Sudbury owns 16 acres of land in Concord.
Maybe we should-
Are we ready to jump into the Sudbury project? Okay. Quarry North is off of Route 117, and there are 274 units currently proposed at that location. They would entirely be in the town of Sudbury, but yes, you are correct that the town of Sudbury owns 16 acres in the town of Concord that is right adjacent to the town's well site. And both locations had been a gravel pit, so that it is in what I would consider to be a degraded condition. There is currently no proposal for any work to be done in Concord, and I would hope that there would be some improvement, some mitigation, some amenities provided that would support the residential component of this housing project in Sudbury, rather than relying on other town of Concord properties to for recreation and White Pond. So that is one of the recommendations that I've made in the memo to you, is that there be some form of mitigation of that gravel pit in Concord. We could also consider whether it should come to the town of Concord, but I would not want to accept it in a degraded condition. And this way, if it is in separate ownership, they would have to pay taxes. They don't currently pay taxes because it's a municipality.
Any other questions or comments?
So I haven't looked at the plans for Quarry North. They haven't included that as planned open space for the development?
There's no proposal.
Okay.
They're only looking at the buildings right now, yes.
Wow, it sounds like our landscape is changing around us quickly.
But you wouldn't be opposed to that if they were going to, upgrade the property.
Seed and loam or something, or at least taxes are.
I think restoration as wildlife habitat would be the most appropriate thing here. I know that significant work was done at the Bristers Hill area to restore that landscape, working with Walden Woods Project and Delia's predecessors. I think Dan Monahan had also been looking at that as plants had seeded in, and they were looking at how could we manage that property in a different way, in a better way. I think a similar type of plan could be developed for Quarry North Concord section.
Seems would be a benefit to their 40B proposal.
Yes.
What's the timing on each of these projects?
The Quarry North is moving rather quickly. It's being offered as an alternative to another project, another 40B project in Sudbury. And they are planning to have a vote in December. Right now there is a meeting or a public forum at the Lincoln Sudbury High School on November 27th at 7:30 p.m. to talk about where they are in the planning process and the benefits of moving forward with the Quarry North project. The December is a special town meeting. It's being paid for by the developer. It will be looking at both disposition of what is known as the Malone property. They were the former owners of the property. And disposition to the developer, or sale to the developer. They did respond to the request for proposals on the property, and they felt that the housing was the most appropriate for that use.
So the other property, the Powder Mill Place, that's
moving forward rather quickly. That's, as I mentioned, November 7th is when the developer is appearing before the Maynard Board of Selectmen. The Acton Board of Selectmen have already signed the agreement on the local initiative project. They'll still have to go through a 40B process. I think Concord should be included in any site eligibility letters, to be notified to raise our concerns and have our concerns addressed.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Your memo was very helpful,
Yeah.
very detailed.
Affordable Housing Funding Committee. Welcome, Todd.
Hello. Hi.
Yeah. Thank you for providing us with the documents early, give us a little head start to be able to.
Right,
Very
yeah.
impressive document.
Well, thanks. We hope the 20 pages didn't scare anybody. It was just 10 pages with a lot of appendices and attachments, so.
A lot of information.
Absolutely.
So I figured I would just start off the conversation with just some brief prepared comments and prepared opening statement, if that's all right.
Please, sir.
Okay, great. So thank you for allowing us the time to present our findings this evening. The Affordable Housing Funding Committee first met on September 26th of last year. We are comprised of 5 members, including myself. So I'd like to sincerely thank the committee, who is Sue Myers, Holly Darzan, Ray Andrews, and Vince Carlson, for the commitment, hard work, optimism, and sense of humor that they bring to this task. We've met a lot since our first meeting, and it has been a pleasure to work with everyone. I'd also like to thank Elizabeth Eldon and Ruthie Bennett, who are early committee members and who helped provide analysis and insight, which continues to inform our work. And of course, no thanks would be sufficient without saying thanks to our select board liaison, Steve Ng, and of course, Linda Escobedo. The committee has also had conversations with many with organizations in town and beyond. I'd like to thank some of those groups for their past and continuing help, and they include the Assessor's Office in Lane Partridge, the Concord Housing Authority, Concord Housing Development Corporation, the Concord Housing Foundation, the Finance Committee and Mary Hartman, the Finance Department and Kerry LaFleur, the League of Women Voters, the Parks Department and Ryan Kane, the Planning Department and Marcia Rasmussen, the Regional Housing Services Office and Liz Rust, and of course the Town Manager's Office and numerous town staff, especially Andrew Mara, who is our go-to person for meetings and all things having to do with AHFC. So as you can see, it's been a truly community-wide effort, and it continues to be a community-wide effort to find solutions to the challenges of supporting affordable homes in our town. As we heard previously, this is not a solution that is, or a challenge that is only relevant to Concord. It affects many of towns across Massachusetts and other states. And in Concord, a surprising number of households are financially overburdened, and I think a lot of people are surprised to hear that. So the risks of failing to find solutions to this challenge include decreased economic vitality, a loss of town character and cohesiveness, less diversity, and a less sustainable town economically, environmentally, and financially. And these are risks that are significant and touch upon each segment of our community, whether it's senior citizens, young couples, families, or businesses. So our committee, as you may recall, was, quote, charged with the responsibility of studying and determining cost-effective means by which the town may fund the continuing expansion of its inventory of affordable housing. And to do this, we looked at a wide range of, well, first of all, we looked at the assessed need for the affordable homes in town. Part of that was mentioned in the 2015 Housing Production Plan and in subsequent conversations and memos to the town. We then adopted a broad approach so solutions did not unfairly focus on one group. We worked hard to present strategies that were equitable and fair to all, knowing there are some individuals and institutions who feel they should be exempt from this process. Our research examined 10 different funding strategies. We also looked at the crucially important topic of zoning, and while zoning is not a focus of our group, a sincere conversation about solutions for affordable homes cannot exist without looking at the impacts of outdated zoning regulations. Zoning is a significant impediment to building the types of homes that Concord and other communities need. So meaningful zoning reform is an imperative catalyst that will allow our town to meet its housing goals while maintaining our character, enhancing our town's vitality, and helping us meet our sustainability goals. So of the 10 strategies explored, we recommend 4. And those 4 strategies represent approaches by which existing residents, builders, buyers of real estate, and exempt institutions each contribute to the town's goals. So when thinking about this, of course, any change, even positive change, it can be stressful and challenging. And because of this, the importance of leadership, perseverance, and persistence cannot be understated in an endeavor like this. The solutions to this challenge require new ways of thinking and the execution of new strategies. And some of these strategies can be implemented quickly, while others will require a longer time horizon. However, all will require a consistent and concerted effort to succeed. So the committee looks forward to continuing to do our part to keep Concord a great place to live and work, while prudently adapting to the current and future needs of our residents. And we look forward to hearing the Select Board's comments and to sharing our report with other housing groups and interested parties in town. So thank you. And with this, what we have here is a brief slide deck that just touches upon some of the key points that were included in the report. I realize perhaps not everybody has seen the report, so we thought as a committee that would be helpful just to provide some talking points and some key points here. So. All right, so here's our town meeting charge, which I briefly touched upon. I won't do that. Our committee members, and a thank you for all those folks that are near. And so a couple of the key points that we wanted to focus on, and we already mentioned some of these about the change and the wide perspective, but I think the crucial thing is really to start to think about points 3, 4, and 5. And that is really the sense of urgency about this topic. By acting now, we can really start to find ways that affordable homes can fit into our town. We've heard some talk about what's going on in neighboring towns, and by acting now, hopefully we can have some more control over the process. Hopefully we can avoid some of the divisiveness that other towns have experienced, perhaps not Sudbury or Acton, Maynard, but other towns. I mean, we're all aware of some of the divisiveness that other towns have had. And the fifth point is, I think, a really important point is this is not the end solution here. This is the beginning, and it's going to take some time and effort. The funding recommendations are what you see here on the top four there. The other ones at the bottom are ones that we looked at previously. I think this is familiar to most folks. Moving on for the annual budget line item. So a couple things just to focus on here for the annual budget line item. A couple quick points here are that this is one that will take some time to implement. So it can be quick because we can do it, we have control of it. So this is, we can go two ways with this. This could be looked at in terms of seed funding. We could do this for a couple of years to get some funds available so that we have funds available, and then we could decide not to continue it. Or it could be a consistent part of funding going on or of budgets going on. So that's a couple of things, a couple of ways to think about it here. One of the points that when we looked at this analysis is that a 1% property tax increase would generate revenue of about $916,000. Based on 2019 projected revenue. What does that 1% mean? That 1% means an increase in property tax bills for a median assessed home of $839,000 of about $124. So, the next strategy is the building permit fee surcharge. This is based on Charles Phillips' concept. Charles Phillips was really the genesis of really the committee and really kind of, I think, bringing the funding conversation to the level of a town-wide conversation. So this is something that really touches upon his work. And so this is really an allocation of funds annually. This would be something that is a progressive approach. It's something where larger projects pay more than smaller projects. And this is one that would require a little bit of time because it requires state legislative approval. For our next strategy, the real estate transfer fee surcharge, this is something that about at least 36 states across the country utilize some form of this. And Massachusetts has one of the lowest fees in New England when it comes to the real estate fee surcharge. This is something that we would suggest be paid by buyers of real estate coming into Concord. And it's also something that was recommended by the Concord Long Range Plan. When we looked at this and we looked at what had transpired between 2012 and 2017, if that volume of sales were to continue, we'd be looking at about $3 million annually from this strategy. So that would be a significant step in the right direction to funding our affordable homes. This would also require state legislation, so this is one that would not be immediately implemented. However, there's been some very optimistic developments in terms of some communities seeing success with open space and land banks with this kind of approach. They've received local funding or local support and state support, state approval. And then the final strategy is the pilot strategy, the payment in lieu of taxes. A lot of people are surprised, and I was surprised actually to hear that Massachusetts leads the nation in collecting pilot. About 80 municipalities within Massachusetts collect some form of pilot. Many of those communities who have looked at it or are looking at it consider this to be an issue of fairness and consider this to be something where it's an equitable arrangement between large institutions who are tax exempt. In our community, 6 of the largest tax exempt entities have property values of about $282 million. When we look at the 5 Concord entities, which are the 4 schools and Emerson, we're seeing that they have revenue of $320 million. When we look at the 4 educational institutions, they have total endowments of over $243 million. And so that's something where we think that this needs a lot of investigation. In 2003, the town had a pilot working group who came to a similar interest, and I'm not really sure where that ended off, but this seems like a timely topic to revisit with sincerity and to move forward with this. Other communities who have educational institutions in their towns have successfully reached pilot agreements with those groups. They've also successfully reached pilot agreements with medical institutions in their communities. So this is something that can be implemented now. We don't need state legislation or anything of that kind to do this. If the 6 entities that are property tax exempt paid the property taxes that would be assessed, we'd be looking at about $3.2 million in annual taxes or annual revenue, which would certainly go a long way to meeting the need for affordable homes. So with that, the other thing that we looked at that we touched upon was the managing of the affordable housing funds. The committee felt that it was really not our purview to make a recommendation about this, but we thought that it would be helpful to at least mention 3 of the topics that seem to rise to the top in looking at this. So those 3 are the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, the revolving fund, and the nonprofit option. But we certainly think that when we get into something like this, where there will be some legal questions, some financial questions, some oversight questions, that's something that was outside of our purview. So having said that, be happy to answer any questions, and I've got some support here in the audience that we'll certainly call upon. So that's our presentation.
Thank you. Anybody like to?
Thank you very much. It's just a very detailed report, and greatly appreciated. I have a lot of questions, but the one I want to start with is just, you have recommendations for how we would gather up the dough, and you outlined those. Why that kind of a breakout? How did you come by the allocation of the need across those particular?
So is your question of how did we figure out which 4 options to recommend?
No, I understand you came down with the 4 options, but why is it that you picked the particular numbers that you did for funding? I mean, for example, we could have had way more coming on the surcharge.
Right.
Double it, for example, and
Sure.
you're done. All right? Well, I'm not for it or anything, but my question was, they're all good options. And when we think about it, they break out in terms of percentages from a low of about 17% to about 36% of the total use. Why that breakout?
Well, I think that when we looked at this, we wanted to do something that was equitable. We didn't want to overburden any one segment of the community, and so we thought that would be a good starting point to have something that we had a community-wide process. If we to use the example of the surcharge, if that was the only option that got us there, we felt that might be viewed as not being a really equitable solution and really kind of only focusing on one aspect of our community. We felt that if we started the process and looked at a wide aspect of our communities, everybody would have an ownership interest, so to speak, in this process, and that we'd have better community support, not just in raising the funding, but also in then implementing the strategies to make affordable homes more realistic. So it was that approach.
So it was just balancing. There was no particular magic to 20% or
Right.
21% or right, just
Correct.
trying to balance. I like that because when we had the proposal last year, the way I was thinking of that proposal was, well, we have to to stay consistent with state goals, independent of our own desires. We have to add, one affordable unit for every 10 units of housing that gets done. And it's new development that's really driving that. So the proposal we had last time was, well, let's have those folks be the ones primarily paying for it. But the other side of the coin to me was, and it's reflected in what you've done here, this is a Concord goal. This isn't some state arithmetic that we're trying to do. It's what the town wants to do. So we all should have a hand in that. So I like that balancing kind of approach there that says we all have a stake in it. But folks who are bringing new houses online here, you're contributing to that. So you too, you don't live in town, so you don't have to pay taxes, but you get to contribute as well.
Right. Yeah.
So I appreciate that balancing very much.
Thank you.
So I had a couple of questions too. So the first one, I'm trying to look at who bears the burden of each of these cost implications. A general budget item goes to the tax base and everybody contributes to the town funds. I'm thinking that in the case of a real estate transfer, somebody sells off a piece of property that has, 40 acres, there's a real estate transfer cost that is incurred on that one. And then the developer puts in a 40-unit development and then pays again. So he's paid at the real estate transfer fund side, and he's forced to pay a second time as a development property. And I just, and then I wonder if we lose something. First of all, that feels like it's a double tax on that project, and maybe that's the right thing, but I didn't know whether you considered that. And the other thought about it was whether we run up against our interest in developers including an affordable unit with every one of their properties. If in fact they now pay a tax, a charge to the town in one of our entities to build affordable units, is there not some push-pull about, well, I'll give you that, but I'm not going to build one of my units, I won't give you one of my units anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that factors into just the cost economic. And the third question was really about, did you guys come up with a goal for annual funding that you think we should aspire to bankroll? These are all individual projects, and you see the funding stream for each, is this the right number? We add them up, we've got, $4 million a year.
4 to 5 million.
Yeah, I mean, is that what we want? I mean,
In other words, if we did all four versus we did individual.
Yeah, what's the grand goal that we're trying to reach? Is it maybe some, I don't know how you answer that, but more money you have, the more opportunity you have, but is there an ultimate goal of what we should strive for, aspire to accumulate each year?
Right. So in terms of the ultimate goal, I think that's something that has been raised in various different forms. So one being, well, is our goal just to get to this 10% number, or do we have a Concord goal that is different than that 10% number? And I think that's a valid question, and that's something that we can't answer at this point. So what we did is we based it on getting to that 10% number in terms of what the planning department had said in terms of the amount of new buildings that come on every year. So, for example, in the executive summary where we mentioned Concord would need to produce 9 to 10 affordable homes per year. So that's where we're basing that on. And if the approximate cost of a home is in the $400,000 to $500,000 range, then that gets us to the $4 to $5 million. So that's how we looked at that number. So the point also is that if you adopted the recommended approach that your committee came up with, then whatever our goal turned out to be, if it was more than the 10%, it was 50 or whatever it was, it would be easy to scale it. We could just go back to these percentage numbers. If we need to get $6 million, okay. So I think your earlier questions are different, but the question the last question I think is we have to figure out as a town, I think in response to the long-range plan, what that goal is going to be and how we get the job done. But if we adopted this, we could just move it up and down. Yeah, we do have some flexibility. And I guess we could look at the $4 to $5 million as kind of the baseline, and because it does meet us, it does get us to that 10%. It was constructed with the idea of that 10% number in mind. So.
And so that's what the 9 to 10 units per year is
yes,
that's
right.
okay.
Going back to Alice's concern about the possible perception of a double tax, can you say a little bit more about the local real estate transfer tax surcharge in terms of who you're proposing would bear the burden of that?
Sure, yeah. So the local real estate tax surcharge, this is one where Massachusetts has a lower fee than most of the other New England states. So this is one where the states can decide how this is paid. And so for our purposes, when we looked at this, we thought that this would be something that the buyer would pay. So the entity that is buying the real estate would pay this. So I mean, that's something that in other areas the seller pays. In some places the buyer pays half and the seller pays half. But we thought for that balance that this would be something that would be the buyer paying that.
Isn't it Massachusetts something the seller pays in Massachusetts?
The excise
Yeah,
stamp.
that's
Yeah.
what I was.
Currently.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so Massachusetts, but we would suggest that the surcharge,
The local surcharge.
right, will be paid by the buyer.
By the buyer.
I just have a question. The change of community preservation rate or allocation, you put that it would not provide a steady revenue source. It strikes me that I'm not sure why it wouldn't. I mean, there might be some change of that, but if you increased the 1.5% to 3%, and you designated that 50% or 1.5% had to come to the affordable housing, why isn't that a steady revenue source?
Well, so for that, there are a couple of things that factor into our thoughts on the CPA allocation, and one of those is the match that the state gives is decreasing. So that's one thing that we talked about and thought about in that context. So in that sense, as more communities adopt the CPA, then the funding will
But it's the
decrease
only
there.
funding source that the state does contribute to. So it strikes me that let's take advantage of their contribution, if you will.
But I think, isn't it true that as more communities sign on to the CPA or adopt the CPA, you're
Going down.
spreading the proceeds, you're setting the benefit among more communities, so the environment in a community gets
But
better.
by law, the state has to match 15%.
I
And
think,
they've been above that.
I think it's 5.
Five is
Five,
only now?
yeah.
Oh.
Which
It
is-
keeps going down.
Yeah,
Right.
I think the governor has indicated some interest in trying to
to raise it to.
raise
yeah.
that, but
But I also think that there's internal pressure, the laundry list that the town itself puts before the CPA for a variety of projects across a variety of departments, is,
No, I understand, but I guess my point is right now, we're at 1.5%. If the town
For
voted to
CPA,
go to
for
3% and said that additional 1.5% would go to the affordable housing, then it seems to me you'd have a pretty good standard source.
the second round of 1.5, so if the town moved from, my understanding is if the town moved from 1.5 to 3 and voted on that, yes, there would be more revenue from the town
Yeah.
taxes allotted to CPA, but the match from the state actually goes down for the second, between 1.5 and 3.0.
it's not
And
the,
you
it's
can't
not the same
you
match.
can't earmark the second 1.5% to solely fund
For
affordable housing.
housing.
I think you have to still do the current
Right.
distribution, that's right. You can't earmark, if we were to go from 1.5 to.
Towns have, I think there are towns who have earmarked a higher percentage than we're currently allocating, than the CPA requires as a minimum. But there are some constraints on the total 3%.
You can't take the second 1.5% and allocate it directly to affordable housing.
I thought that there was a 10 or 15% had to be allocated to open space, had to be allocated to
There are
historic.
allocations that are required.
But they were less, I mean, they don't add up to 100%. They add up to 40 or 50%. So it strikes me you would be able to. But I guess it seems to me that's a revenue source that would be reliable, and it just struck me as it's surprising that you would put the reason you weren't going for it was because it's unreliable. And I guess my second comment is the payment in lieu of taxes. You're asking for nonprofit organizations that by law are not required to do so. So these would have to be voluntary. Is that correct?
That's right.
And I noticed that Harvard was not listed among the list. They seem to have perhaps a revenue source that might be larger than many of the other ones that we are looking for. I'm surprised they weren't on the list.
Yeah, they're certainly included in the 6 largest exempt property owners, and the concern there is if we include them, that they'll vastly skew the numbers, and it'll give a false idea of really what is there. And the other conversation, because we wanted to look at that in terms of what the entities that are in Concord, and we're certainly not opposed to reaching out to Harvard, but I thought it would give we thought it would give a better picture of what the entities in Concord are doing versus an entity that is outside of Concord and has resources or has property here. So that was the methodology there. But it's certainly very easy to add Harvard into the equation and look at what that would be. I think that they're
And I worry that all these other ones are contributing to the town. I'm not sure how much Harvard does. We're going after institutions that are expending money for pretty good purposes, educating and scholarships, and the hospital has a lot of outreach and things that they're doing in terms of helping. I worry that it's sort of going to them and saying, look, we're going to require you now, or requesting that you, contribute pretty large amounts of sums, may not be the best way to go about it.
Because that's our task, to take the recommendations and mull them over and have a...
well, and I think too, when we look at the amount of the taxes that would be assessed to these entities, and we look at that as a percentage of assets, net assets, or as a percentage of revenue, or as a percentage of the endowment in the terms of the educational institutions, I think that really makes that feeling that it's a large amount a little bit different. I mean, when we look at the when we look at the tax as a percentage of endowment, we're looking at, in total, with those four entities, a total of about less than 1% on average. I mean, Middlesex is 0.73% of property tax as a percentage of their endowment. Concord Academy is 1.08%, and these are on page 9 of the report there. So when we look at it in that, when we start to look at the numbers, I think that tells us a little bit of a different story than what we might have initially expected.
Minor problem along that same line that Allison brought up before. I mean, I don't recollect for all of these, Chris would know, but I know that Middlesex School, for example, makes periodic contributions to the town for projects, the track, as I recall, and some sidewalks. So again, it's the same issue raised with the folks who build affordable units. When they decide, okay, we'll pay, or we'll have a pilot fee, but don't expect us to contribute.
Perhaps. We did look at that, and when we looked at Middlesex, for example, they're the ones who seem to consistently contribute about $45,000 a year, and they're the only entity out of the four that have an expected future contribution of about $225,000, about $45,000 over the 5 years. And when we look at that as a percentage of the property tax, what Middlesex contributes in terms of $45,000 a year is about 4.5% of the property tax. When we look at Concord Academy and the information that we were able to look at in that context, they've contributed about $4,000 over the past 10 years. So when we look at that as a percentage of the property tax, that's 0.05% or 0.06% of the property tax. So in that case, I think we might be better off with the property tax, or that approach, versus the occasional gift. And of course, affordable homes would also benefit these institutions as well. Their employees, their staff could conceivably work in those homes and be closer to where they're employed.
Mm-hmm. Another small potential source of revenue, which is in the future, but I'll report when we get to committee. Regional reports I attended the Mass Municipal Association Fiscal Policy Committee meeting last week, and one of the proposals that they're going to put before the governor is to increase the local option on meals and food from 0.75 to 1.5%. So, and they have others as well, but they're all tied. One is for alcohol that would be tied to health, and one is for transportation that would be tied to infrastructure and stuff like that. But the meal one is unrestricted. I'm not saying we should do it or anything, but it might come up as and I think the state would likely view, the surcharge that you proposed in the same sort of way. It's sort of like giving a town a local option to impose it impose an additional tax, so it's in the same general vein.
You've given us a lot to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to the committee. Great work.
So I think we
Want to
have.
have a comment?
Hi. Charles Phillips, 65 Fairhaven Road, Chair of the Concord Housing Foundation. And I just wanted to commend the committee for truly excellent amount of work, a huge amount of work has gone into this, and I'm just extremely impressed. I guess I'd like to be bold enough to ask the Select Board to, and the Finance Committee, to actually find out of one of these four choices, good choices that they have submitted, a particular proposition that will come to the next town meeting. Possibly, I mean, we really need Select Board to say yes, Finance Committee to say yes, and go forward. I'm wondering whether a joint Select Board Finance Committee meeting might hash out which one to bring forward, if they can agree on something. So that's my proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Steve Carr, 308 Musterfield Road, and also on the Concord Housing Foundation. If my ever-fading memory is correct, at the town meeting where the proposal was made by people who are affordable housing interested, was not passed, but instead, if again my ever-fading memory is correct, Mr. Lawson, among others, suggested that instead we form a committee, and the town meeting, not by an overwhelming majority, but went along with that. But I think the idea was that the committee would come back the next year's town meeting with a proposal that for it to act. I think at a June meeting of the board, a couple of months afterwards, there was a question about how we did all about that, and I think I mentioned that it's now June. If we don't get moving quickly, we won't make the next year. And I think it was reported here that the first meeting was in October, and we didn't make the next year. I was disappointed. I understand it's not an easy subject, but I think many people in town would be disappointed if we didn't make this upcoming year's town meeting. If I were in your shoes, I might say, okay, here are some proposals, and you, the board, take it from here. If I were in the board's seats, I might say, why don't you come up with a recommendation? But what I think, no matter how it works out, I think there'll be many people who will be disappointed if it doesn't make it before this year's town meeting. And the other thing while I'm here is, whatever the issue was, 2, 3, 4 years ago, there was a request to the various nonprofits in town, why don't you pay some real estate taxes or something in lieu of real estate taxes? And my memory is that 1 out of 30 or something or other like that said yes. That board happened to have 2 people on their board who happened to be members of the select board. And that was the only one in town. So whatever plans we make as far as raising money, I don't think that you should say, and we expect 25% or whatever it is to come from the nonprofits in town. They're not required to do it. We don't have any, I wouldn't think we have any leverage over Harvard or anyone else like that. So if we get anything from the nonprofits, it ought to be just a bonus, but we ought to plan, if we think we need, or shooting for X dollars, we ought to do it, not including any money from the nonprofits.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you. Thanks a lot. Now, yes.
I'm wondering whether we should, this board ought to schedule an extra select board meeting and devote the entire week figuring out what recommendations we would support important to work on in the short term. Which of these might be ready based on our decision to get to town meeting, because we would have to get it on the warrant by the end of December or early January. So I'm going to suggest that the only way we're going to get there is if we decide to schedule it.
Would you suggest that be in conjunction with the finance committee or
I
separate?
think we have to get our own
Done first.
Crossing rivers.
Yeah, I think we need to figure out our strong recommendations, look at the cost implications, look at the sector impact, make sure we understand what our proposal would be. Once we know, I think then we go to the finance committee.
On the one hand, I think that's a terrific idea. I too would not go to the finance committee. I'd want us to put it together and then give it to them, because they've got their own responsibilities to tell town meeting, what they think about these things. Here's my only reservation. My only reservation is I think there is still a decision to be made about what Concord's affordable housing goals are. It's all wrapped up, unfortunately, I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's all wrapped up in the issues of diversity and then many of the issues that were raised by the long-range plan. So I suppose we could finesse that in some way by saying, well, we don't exactly have that resolved yet, but we do know we want to be at least in compliance with the state requirements and go with that, as long as there's that caveat that we haven't yet come to terms with what our goals are as opposed to what our state imposed goals. So with that kind of caveat, I'd be more than happy. I've encouraged us to have a meeting devoted just to the long-range plan, because we've got a lot of work to do there. And on top of that, this one as well, and I firmly support the idea of not going too heavily on payment in lieu of taxes. I'd like to see it happen. Again, the Fiscal Policy Committee has previously entertained notions of going to the state with enabling legislation to, but they've always backed away from that for kind of the reasons we're all talking about. But stay on those other three and come up with a plan. I think we have to go to, my hope would be we would go to town with a plan, and that plan would include an approach to funding. So it's really, here's what we think our goals are for the time being. They may be get adjusted as we sort of deal more with the long-range plan. But starting this as a base, here's the approach to financing affordable housing in town that we think we could support.
That certainly sounds like a good framework, and I think the other thing that I'm remembering was in the long-range plan had to do with the need for, besides the 10%, was the need for a flexible strategy to reach the 10% should we need it in short order.
Which gets at the zoning read. How we use our.
No, should our current plans on the table for staying above the 10%
Suddenly just,
not materialize for, let's hope we're not there, but if we're there, that there is a real need for the town to have a flexible strategy to get us to that 10% in short order. So I think taking that, and the only reason I'm raising that and remembering that from the long-range plan is that that is another impetus, I think, for us to move on some action if we can.
So now we're looking at scheduling.
We meet next Monday as the board here, so we already have, yeah. So we don't have a meeting, I believe, on the 12th, that which is a Monday night. We gotta do that, or we could meet on some other.
I'd meet anytime, and we could meet on a Saturday morning or early in the morning. But again, I don't think, Linda, and I think it all comes down to if the Junction Village project goes through, we're okay. If it doesn't, I don't think there is a plan that could get us a number of units.
No, but we could have taken an action step perhaps that is moving us along somehow, rather than just staying in place.
So,
Yeah, I hear you, I hear you.
what is, in terms of people's schedules, would you prefer to do a Saturday, or would you?
I'd have another
And
night.
Saturday,
Another night?
I'd have
Yeah.
another night. Go on a liaison meeting and have our own.
Just plug it in on the 12th, is that the empty?
I'm out of town on the 12th.
Days observed.
Observed,
The
yeah.
11th, technically, but it's a holiday.
That's right,
as well. So some people might want to participate in, so we even have a Tuesday to follow the next day.
Next
Are you
day is
still
the
out of
Wayland
town?
Town meeting that two of us are going to. And, about November 8th. Wednesday the 7th. Well, that's a big another hearing. November 6th. We're meeting on the 5th.
It's election day.
Election day.
That's what? Election day.
Oh,
That's
it doesn't say that on my
Busy.
calendar. November 14th.
That would work.
that works for
That
me.
works for me.
7 o'clock.
Jane,
Which day?
14?
14th.
Wednesday the 14th.
Yep. Wednesday the 14th.
I know there's going to be something in the hearing room that night.
On the 14th?
Yeah, that's the dog park, no,
13th is the dog park.
Okay.
14th is the
That's the
expanding
HDC's public
HEC.
forum.
Good, what is it?
The Historic Districts Commission's, public forum on increasing on changing the size of the.
Historic district.
Historic district.
Yeah, the neighborhood forum that they.
Neighborhood
Don't meet it here,
forum.
can't we?
So I would feel
Torn.
torn, I mean, I think that's,
Can we record two meetings? I felt it was one or the other. We could record in that room or we could record in this room.
That's something I'll have to defer to Aaron to make sure that we can do that.
So we can't do them live.
Can't do it.
And I think HDC really wanted to record it.
right,
Yeah.
May I suggest that we task our
Andrew.
good friend, don't look away, young man. Andrew with polling us and finding a date that we
Yeah.
can all get together and meet.
So we could do a 5 o'clock.
We could do
Yeah.
that.
5?
Fine, yeah.
That gets away from all those problems.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sounds really smart.
Andrew?
And creates a nice long day.
Okay.
Okay, now we're ready to discuss the possible permanent municipal building committee.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
I had hoped to have a draft committee charge for you for the next two items and do not, but I did provide you examples of what Wellesley has for a permanent building committee. Weston has a bylaw, they have a permanent building committee with a bylaw, and one other community, Lexington. So you have some fodder, some sense of, my suggestion is I see the Wellesley has a project cost over $500,000. That's seems reasonable to me, so minor repairs, carpet, boiler replacement wouldn't be included. It would be major additions onto buildings or reconstructing buildings.
Look, we state it that way rather than some dollar amount. I guess the committee is for new or major reconstruction.
Yeah.
And that's a 500, you don't have a.
So in 10 years, 500 won't go as far as it does today.
Now, my understanding is that any school building has to go, the state has a process.
The state does have, if you want to participate in the state
It's
funding, you have to
Yes,
follow
they
their process, and they designate the school committee member and the superintendent, and faculty, and they.
But that's only if you're interested in MSBA funds.
Right.
So you could have worded that in a way that the building committee, and if the facility is a school building, not the regional high school, but the K-8 system, the board will determine to follow the process or not. In the past, for the 3 elementary school buildings, the select board appointed the building committee, and the town manager was the contract awarding authority for those 3 elementary school projects, not for the high school.
So I would use that language would be fine with me. We have this for certain kinds of projects. and for schools unless the school committee decides to apply for funds through MSBA, and then that process will be followed.
So my only question, and maybe Tom can help, describe this. In several of these samples that you included in our packet, the terms of each person is still limited to either 3 years or 4 years. It could happen that on that project, that there, in somebody's 2-year or 3-year term, there's nothing
Right.
that gets built. And then we go out and having to seat a committee anyway. Some towns that I had seen had a permanent list of people who were willing to serve. And, I can imagine.
You select according to the type of project that might be.
So maybe
And
that's a
if there
different
is.
approach, as opposed to seating a committee
Yeah.
for a 3-year term and having members staggered, because they may go beyond their term and never see a project come through.
True that.
And the problem with a standing committee that has no term limits is somebody can time out, age out, interest out, and we're still in the same position of trying to find people, or they have a conflict of interest on a particular project. or-
That came up the last time we talked about this, and I think that's a very sensible way. I think seating a committee
Per
and
project.
then waiting for something to show up.
Then we lose them, I would think.
I bet we could go forward with the idea of creating a potential pool of applicants that we could approve, just like they were committee people. They could be approved applicants, and then we would
To be
draw
passed
from the approved pool of applicants. So people would still know, they're in the
They're
pool.
on
They're like in jury duty, they're in the pool.
So as I was thinking about this, I also had a question, it's mostly for you, Chris, about, as we've had some earlier reference to a facilities management plan, and we also have a facilities manager. So I'm trying to think about how this would interface, as well as interface with like our Public Works Department that does so much of the in-house engineering and other kinds of things already, for projects that are probably over 500.
It's amazing how many projects are over 500,000.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's a good question. I think the public works folks would like to be excluded, and Rich Rain has said that, for a well or rehab, a reservoir, which could easily exclude that. So I don't know if you consider an exclusion for even though the wastewater treatment plant expansion or the new water filtration building. They have a certain level of expertise. They want to select the engineers that they're comfortable with, that sort of thing. I have 2 pages, the first 2 pages done, and I'm suggesting that that the committee would make recommendations to the town manager on awarding contracts for design services, construction services, that sort of thing. So it isn't the committee actually doing the contracting. We don't have a practice of committees doing contracting. Awarding.
You're the only one who can.
Correct. So I drafted it that way. But, so I know that in talking to the department heads about it, that was one reservation the public works folks had, is they do a lot of
highways and street improvements.
And so I think we typically, they compare vertical construction, buildings, versus horizontal construction, which is pipes, and typically you exclude the horizontal construction. But even with the vertical construction, like a water reservoir, for some reason we need a 3rd storage tank for water. Would it be the building committee that would oversee that or not? You can.
I think when this was first brought to our attention, it seems like quite a long time ago.
It was June.
It was for
Structures.
It was for municipal buildings, and I think we should keep it. It's stuff that's going to be visible around town and that kind of stuff.
Lynn asked a good question, because I think in February we're going to have a draft facilities master plan come out, which will detail all of our current space requirements and will project our future needs, and will identify where our buildings are not adequate, both in terms of the townhouse, the complex the public works stuff there. I would compare the townhouse with the 141, is that we're both bursting at the seams, don't have enough room for our existing staff, the space is not modernized, and we're sprawled throughout town, and so it really doesn't lend itself. So to efficient operations. So that was something that Elise Woodward talked about years ago, that having, when more in the context of the school buses, we should be looking to sort of consolidate our facilities into convenient locations where people can collaborate rather than sprawl.
I think we've
So-
talked about a town campus-esque kind of.
So, at your point, I've advocated for a committee, in part, more to advocate for the need for buildings and to help with the timing and the political persuasion of convincing the public that we need facilities, less so for the contract management, but there's a tie-in. So I think we're going to get a report this winter that will identify some needs, and they're not immediate needs. We're not at a crisis level, but in the next 10 years, we should be thinking about new office space, public safety space, and public works.
So looking backwards, would the, for instance, the transportation building, would that have been, I'm just trying to give us a ballpark.
Right.
Would the,
So repair facility, it would make some sense to have a centralized repair facility for any town department that has vehicles that need to be repaired. We have 2 fueling stations, and that works pretty well, one at the light plant and one at Kais Road. And those 2 fueling facilities it's convenient that the cars on the west side, refilled. I think Elise would have preferred a single centralized facility for buses and all other municipal vehicles. So we need to have that conversation.
But if this committee had been in existence at the time, what would their role have been?
Well, it seems like, I think there was some interest in having a public process, to have a committee that folks can go to and find out exactly what's happening with this particular building and that sort of thing. I think that's what the finance committee is interested in. I think developing some expertise, so we have some citizens that are knowledgeable in construction, architecture and design, and having them have a more collaborative and transparent process for project, the decision to tear down a building, the decision to build a new one.
So is the plan to have you complete?
Yes, so I'll have a draft. It's partly done, but I got into these complicated issues.
Yeah, no, none of these are simple.
So
Let me just offer another complication to this. I'm sorry to do this, but if we think that almost anything that the affordable housing organizations, whether we hold the funds or somebody else, they will all be in excess of 500,000, whatever gets built.
That's
How
not-
does this committee then, I mean, if you,
you created the Housing Development Corporation specifically, I think, to borrow money and construct facilities or contract to construct facilities. So they really are your vehicle, I think, for constructing housing, whether it's public, not publicly owned, it's a housing authority, but for privately owned or rental housing, whether it's owner occupied or rental. I think they're the vehicle the town created to manage that process.
be the building facility management, or facility building committee. I mean, I didn't manage the funds, I just wanted to make sure we're not
So
tripping over
funds.
ourselves,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
in what we're doing here. We're
Yeah.
exempting linear,
Right.
or,
Horizontal.
horizontal, yeah, and we're exempting, technical construction like a wastewater treatment plant. We're looking at buildings only, but not affordable housing, which the
Right.
town may have collected the funds and be paying for through however we've accumulated the funds, but are not using this committee to help, okay?
So you could have a conversation with them. That's my initial reaction, is that they may have strong feelings that that the housing folks know how to save money in constructing housing, and they don't feel they need a building committee to help them with that, but they may see it differently.
I understand it's very heavily regulated, the affordable housing unit, so there's a lot of state-imposed regulations already, so.
Well, some of the housing units.
The design build process,
Yeah.
so that, if we had, I'm thinking that if we had funding available, we might be able to exercise an interest in a property that's commercially on the market. Use the funds that have been now collected from the public entities that we've, deemed, to give us some money for it. So now we are buying property and either renovating or tearing down a building. And you're saying tearing down a building is a CHGC inherent fund, inherent expertise, if that's who we would rely on, could be maybe more transparent.
Well, it's a question we'll have to deal with because independent of exactly how we go about
Right.
doing this, there is no obligation. Suppose we figured out a way to raise $4 million a year through some of the recommendations here. It doesn't need to go to the housing authority.
Right.
It can be set up in an account for the town, and the town, it could be a number of different options there.
When we were considering the Blackbirch
And that's
issue,
private.
Liz gave us a number of options in terms of how the funds could be held and the restrictions, so that.
So I'm just looking at what is the role of the CHBC. The town gives the CHBC money to go and buy the property and decide if it's going to tear down the house that's there and build a multi-unit or a single unit, whatever they do. That's the building committee. Separate from the permanent building committee, which would be a different municipal.
Yes.
Well, we treat
Municipal
it
office
similar
of-
to the way we would treat schools. I mean, in some very loosely structured way, they would be the building committee unless,
So I think we just have to
Oh,
specify that in the
absolutely, has to
charge.
be specified.
And sort of make sure I understood how we were going to use which committee.
And many of the affordable owners are just private. I mean, you mentioned the Black Birch, I mean, that
Right,
is a private development, no building committee, the developer is.
right.
Okay, so Tom and I will discuss when this will appear on the agenda again, perhaps as early as the
Great.
fifth or the
And I think the finance committee might.
Well, I didn't hear the last comment that the town manager made. Are you going to discuss this further at another meeting?
Yes.
That's all. So, Tom Tarpey, of the Finance Committee, but really speaking for myself, this idea, as you know, is one that is near and dear to the heart of Phil Swain, and I was surprised that he isn't here tonight. No one has expressed the essence of the idea as he has conceived it, which is to create and maintain a reservoir of institutional memory about contract management and the ways that a community can save money and build most economically. And I'm glad to hear that you're going to be discussing it again, because we'll make sure that Phil gets here to lay his ideas out in greater detail. Good, thank you.
Thank you. Review and approve public-private partnerships.
So, Mr. Lawson said, could we please have a charge for this committee? What I propose is that two members of the board, myself, at least to start, work together to publicize the public-private partnerships that we have and their status. Are they active? Are they inert? And then if there's a major project, which we know there are a couple in the pipeline, to develop a process for managing those public-private partnership where there's a significant investment that the public may be interested in.
I've asked Linda if she'd be willing to serve and with me, so the three of us can get together and try to iron something out. I think less people have objections to that.
I don't have any objection, but just as a point of clarification, you're not creating a subcommittee.
Correct.
You're
No,
just
it's
tasking
Yeah.
two members of the board to work with the town manager. Good.
Thank you for
Good clarification.
clarifying, putting that on the record. We now can move to the review and approve Concord Center Cultural District Committee draft charge.
This is exciting.
Yes, so this reflects largely what you see in the West Concord Committee charge. It doesn't have a date in there, but Marcia said that the Concord Center Cultural District was created in 2012, and the Junction District was 2016. So we'll insert the date of 2012, we'll get the precise date.
Concord Center was renewed in 2017.
It was
The prior
created
year.
by, okay, so
So, and the need for a committee wasn't seen at that time, but now it seems
It's part
that
of
it
the
would be useful.
expectation of mass cultural.
So otherwise, it reflects, I changed the wording a little bit because the West Concord cultural districts sort of focused on artists as the first, was sort of listed first in a lot of their description, and I thought the historic houses or institutions are more prevalent here, so I listed those first, but included artists and others in the list of entities in the district.
Well, Marcia, you may be closer to this than I have been, but I understand that there's a sort of a different flavor developing in the Concord Center Cultural District in terms of its goals.
I think it has a different orientation than West
Yeah.
Concord. They will, though, work together. They've talked about collaborating on different events, but I think with Concord Center you have the tourist and visitor orientation, which is stronger than in West Concord.
Right. So do you think that the membership, as Chris has outlined it, would be the right?
I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance to.
It would be one member representing the historical sites in Concord Center, one the visual arts, the other performing arts, and 4 citizens at large. I'm just wondering, I know that there's been some discussion about the retail interplay of the, and this might be something we can take offline and just massage one member or so, if that's not.
I think your citizens at large could address
that. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't have it in front of me right now either at the moment, but and I thought it covered a lot of bases. What I couldn't remember and didn't see anything about, if I'm correct, about marketing or outreach or website or that whole area of communications. Isn't that one of the goals for each of these?
Conducting outreach is important, as well as establishing a Facebook page and so forth, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be part of the charge. I think it's just part of the outgrowth and the expectation that Mass Cultural Council has for and my office, as well as the Chamber of Commerce, helps support those areas of outreach.
It does say, it says to conduct outreach to learn how to, the cultural committee might be supportive of artists, businesses, so, yeah.
I think it's the
But you're
the
saying
aim
that
is there
program.
versus the specifics.
And just on the membership, the West Concord Junction has 5 members at large, and no member from an historical institution. The discharge has 4 members, and the designated
And
person
that's-
from one of the historical.
Other comments, or, I thought it made a lot of sense. Do we have a motion then?
Sure. I move to approve the committee charge for the Concord Center Cultural District Committee as prepared in our package,
Drafted.
as drafted, no, as amended, on the
Amended.
date of 2016, or whatever the first date.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We're now review and amend town manager search committee charge and discuss RFP, and has been provided.
Andrew, to highlight that originally it was envisioned that one of the responsibilities of the committee would be to locate a management consultant, but the board is going to take care of that, so I suggest you revise the committee charge to strike that, if you agree.
And for the record, the subcommittee consisting of Alice and myself, we're meeting tomorrow morning.
Is it a subcommittee?
It is.
It is a subcommittee, and we have been duly noticed.
Yeah,
Just-
we're whacked on the wrist.
So soon after
Yeah.
efficient
Barely got started.
It's meeting here tomorrow at
9 o'clock.
this room.
This room? That means we have to be out by 10 o'clock because
Yeah.
the delegation's in here too? Okay. So we're ready for a motion?
We're ready for
Move to approve the the amended town manager search committee, committee charge that was presented at tonight's meeting and in our packet as amended.
That's to strike, is it to strike C1?
C1.
Striking C1 from the existing charge.
Second.
all those in favor?
We have to Can't
Public comments.
Till our public.
Clears the room.
Only
Town
one.
manager search, oh, we did that one, yeah.
Committee liaison. Linda, would you like to begin? We work our way around the table.
Sure. I attended the Juro Land Update Forum, which was a lively forum, and they did in fact get feedback. And we saw the presentation this evening. ZBA still has an opening, so if anyone is...
ZBA has an opening?
Yes, and very much would like to have that filled. I think there's one pending consideration right now, but we're not quite ready. The public celebrations and ceremonies committee met, and I just want to remind everybody that November 1st is women veterans will be recognized at the State House, and at the 11th, November 11th, veterans in town will be, there will be a ceremony that starts at 8 o'clock, and for those people who want to gather at the second gate for the cemetery, the Pritchard Gate, which is across from Partridge Lane. And I also learned, attending their meeting, that there are approximately 680 veterans in town.
What?
680 veterans in town. I attended the CPC meeting, maybe a couple in the interim. They've obviously completed all their site visits, and this last meeting they began reviewing the specific applications that have come in. They're asking various groups for their recommendations of their priorities because the list is so outstrips the money that is anticipated to be available. A couple of us attended the ribbon cutting for the Concord Market, and that was our town crier, Stephen Ng, did the select board proud in his usual performance, and we wish the Concord Market success. And then just before this meeting, I attended the Recreation Committee, and
I didn't hear that, which meeting?
the Recreation Committee, and they were discussing a very ambitious action plan that they have in place to increase their revenues and their programming for the benefit of members and potential members to join the BD Center.
As a member, I can't wait to see.
Yeah.
There you go.
I attended, as I think I mentioned, the Mass Municipal Association Fiscal Policy Committee. We had a legislative update on the state budget and discussed and approved our recommended legislative package for the 2019-20 session, and talked for a while about some best practices in some of the municipalities. And I also attended HATS meeting. It was held in Lexington. We had a presentation by Paul Regan, the executive director of the MBTA. I think the positive note that he made was a spending package that's been approved, and I heard the governor actually mention it, of $8 billion going into transportation over the course of the next 5 years, buying a number of cars. As I think I recall, it was something like the Orange Line was completely redone, and another line, I can't remember which one it was exactly, virtually redone, and also a number of signal replacements, which were equally important to the new cars, so that was really good. And then the fun thing that I attended was, Jane, you may can report on it, so I'll let you, but the West Concord Day, with last Saturday was really fun, lots and lots of people out, the place was bustling, and I'll call out Deborah's Gourmet. She had inside of her store just a complete line of things to sample.
Oh, great.
Local folks bringing things in was just terrific. So I think it was a pretty successful day for West Concord. That's what I have.
Great. I attended the school committee on October 23rd. It was a recognition of teachers from each of the schools discussing their focus on advancing efforts on inclusive culture. having flags from the country of all the students' heritage, something like 72. It was an amazing number. There's also students reporting on their independent methods of communication with other students regarding school activity. Clearly the technology, they have their own way. And there was updates on campus projects, the 2018 MCAS and accountability report, and there was a brief discussion on the PEG Access user agreement. And then also Finance Committee on October 25th, discussion regarding the preliminary budget guidelines, which have already been reported by Chris. And members of the school committee, the school superintendent, and the school's director of finance and operations were present, and I think that was very much appreciated. They were able to provide information and updates. And there was a recognition that preliminary guidelines are based on incomplete information, so may need to be adjusted. And there did attend the Concord market. That's where we noticed the tower. And I would just quickly, Andrew provided me a list of committee vacancies. There's quite a few. Those that are appointed by the select board, the zoning board of appeals, there are 2 associates needed. Bruce Friedman Rail Trail Advisory, 4 vacancies. Financial Audit Advisory Committee, 3 vacancies. Junction Village Open Space Task Force, 4 vacancies. Need a representative from West Concord Advisory Committee, Natural Resource Commission, Historic District Commission, and Commission on Disabilities. Public ceremonies and celebrations, there's 1 vacancy. Tax fairness, 2 vacancies. Trustees of town donations, 1 vacancy. West Concord Junction Cultural District Committee, 2 vacancies. Nuclear Metal Star Met Property Reuse Planning Committee, 7 vacancies.
That's because we haven't seen it yet, right?
And the SUASCO River Stewardship Council, we need a representative there.
I'm working on that one.
And the Conservation Restriction Stewardship Committee, 1 vacancy. Appointments by town manager, council on aging, 1
Now,
associate.
is that in addition to the one that we're going to be appointing? I think we've got a number of appointments.
That takes into consideration the 2 people that are going to be appointed in June.
That takes that into consideration.
Yeah, so.
So these are all in addition to whatever we're gonna do tonight?
Yes.
Okay, wow.
Natural Resource Commission, 1 vacancy, and the Massport Community Advisory Committee, we need a representative. So we've got a lot to fill.
Can that
So
list
can we
be
also
sent
talk
to?
about that?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
We'll try to update that on a regular basis so that
Yeah.
you can be reminded.
Isn't it left downstairs on the bulletin board when you come in?
Should be posted online.
Yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, this thing just got finished this afternoon. We'll post this onto the website. There is a thing where you go to volunteer and it says the vacancies. We'll talk to the public relations officer. She'll update the website to put that on there. And we probably should send out a news and notice too.
Yeah.
What about actually having the committees also all remind the,
There really is.
Yeah.
because I know that that doesn't often happen. It often goes unspoken, but having that be a first order of business, because people in the room are already interested.
There's also something I'll certainly bring up at the chair's breakfast.
Exactly.
And so that's my report.
Well, thank you, and I apologize because I was teed up to do a wonderful jingle on the West Concord Cultural Day, or visit with West Concord Celebration Day, and I was actually away on work for most of a week. But I did hear from everybody that it was a very large success. Face painting, there were over 100 faces painted. There was, traffic in all of the retailers. Those that didn't actually necessarily sell more were certainly happy to have the foot traffic. And there's a unanimous wish to do it again.
That was terrific.
And I think that the Concord Center, I think this is, West Concord has got its pulse, its finger on the pulse, and there's a lot of interest in it. As I said, I don't have any committee reports to make. I will say I had the incredible honor to attend the 50th anniversary celebration of Concord Prison House this weekend. And it is I had no idea about the history of the prisons and the role of several of our honored citizens in town, Di Clymer, and her role along with Jean Bell in founding that 50 years ago, with the curtains to be sewn for, it was the first request of the prison superintendent. But, I don't know that everybody knows that the history, I certainly didn't, that it was formed, the Concord prison started in 1876, because of the concern voiced by Concord citizens of the inappropriateness of housing younger members with hardened criminals in some of the other prisons, and a wish to have a prison built in Concord, which is why the reformatory was built. It was a fascinating evening with some very, very inspirational speakers, and
Great.
I can't recommend it more highly to those who are as ignorant as me and those who are like Alice, who've been steeped in work.
It's no longer used for the original purpose, which was the youth, that changed.
Yes, I didn't mean to imply that, but it was interesting
Yeah.
to see that Concord, we don't necessarily think of it as an asset, or at least we don't necessarily promote it that way, and yet it was built in Concord at Concord's request.
Thanks for going. I'm sorry I couldn't be there for it. So Chris already talked about the planning board, which I attended. It was a standing room only on this project at 1440 Main Street. And as you heard, we continued. We had the kickoff meeting for the Climate Action Advisory Board meeting, and the board was fully seated, and there were at least as many people in the audience. Conversation was lively for a new board. They're just getting themselves organized, and we had a presentation by KLA, Kim Lundgren Associates, our consultant who's been working on the greenhouse gas inventory, and she did her team did a great presentation on our greenhouse gases, but it generated a lot more questions about, how you gather that kind of information, how reliable it is. It was a really good first kickoff meeting. It was more than a kickoff. Let's see, I attended the Hanscom Field Advisory Committee, and we were briefed on the annual noise report. You'd be happy to know noise is down, so are the flights. It may correspond. And I'm happy to share both the monthly reports and the year reports, but it's very, very detailed. But maybe it goes in the town archives. It's a small group, but they're very well meaning in keeping things on track at the airfield. And I think that's it. My Mass Municipal Association Public Works Committee was canceled this week because the chair couldn't make it in from Western Mass, so it has yet to be rescheduled.
We're now ready for miscellaneous correspondence. I have one letter from William Duggan, Scoutmaster Troop 132, and Curtis Young, Committee Chair Troop 132, that asking to write a congratulatory letter to two Concord residents who have achieved the rank of Eagle Scout, an Aidan Edmondson of 10550 Marlborough Road, and Justin Reed of 13 Dover Street. And so I will
move to authorize the chair to
sign the letters.
Yeah, right, great. Congratulations.
And I think the only other thing that the correspondence is received something from the cemetery committee.
Yes, I do
Which
too.
were really quite interesting, I thought, all the various ways that one can be remembered.
So as a public meeting will be on November 7th. Everyone is invited because this gets at the question of, they call it supply, but it's about the burial options.
Yeah.
Supply.
Well, it is a supply burial.
It is, but it's looking at, there are a lot of changing attitudes about what happens with your remains, and they want to get folks' input about how they choose.
Part of a garden.
That's one of the options.
I read that with some interest.
Yeah.
So I thought that was fascinating, very well done, the
Yeah,
letter.
very well done.
Do we know if
I
that
hope you all
meeting,
come to the meeting.
excuse me, do we know if that meeting's going to be taped, recorded? And the reason I'm raising this is that it may have broad public appeal.
Yeah.
I believe it is. I think they've been doing it. They've done a lot of outreach ahead of time.
Where do they meet?
It's going to be
It's on
in.
November 7th in the hearing.
It's going to be in the hearing room at 7 p.m. November 7th.
Should be
and
able to tape it.
I'm
not broadcast it.
fairly positive it is. I think Mallory reached out to Aaron a
Good.
couple weeks ago. They've done a lot of coordination to make sure that we're going to be okay.
Well, it also makes sense to make sure our favorite reporter from Concord Journal was there, because that's an article that should be placed near the obits.
Well, it's more than that. It's about planning. You know, we've had a gentleman.
No, I'm just saying where the
talk
readership
to us
is
about-
when they're thinking.
Yeah.
So we're any other correspondence or
I think we
miscellaneous?
all also received a letter from NASPER regarding their campaign to support electric buses in the Commonwealth. And I actually reached out to Brendan directly to remind him that we had one, and we're very pleased with its existence. And I'm trying to pull up because my site just crashed
Oh,
here.
I can probably get it if you want.
His response to me, which is...
Oh, you responded.
He did. And yes, they were very excited about the electric bus pilot program in Massachusetts. And they actually have a new report on financing and grant funding options available to cities and schools. They're citing us, he is pleased to say. And the report comes out tomorrow. So we will be getting one, and be happy to send us a copy. We should probably get that one for the front office with Andrew. And they're hoping that we will support their petition in order to increase the use and availability of these electric buses. I know that I believe it was when we did the electric bus study, and we had one school committee member in the room, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that we were, would be open to more electric buses if they would be available on a grant program. But I think the numbers that we looked at were around, they'd have to drop by half in order to become, to make their case against the cost of a diesel bus in our system. And I know that we're still buying more buses, so I'm hoping that that happens quickly, so that we're not locked into ever-increasing newer diesel fleet when electric buses are available.
So I would move that this board, since we know that we have supported electric buses in our fleet, that we sign the NASPER petition that reads, we the undersigned mayor, state legislators, city councilors, and basically says that we support the use of electric buses for students for a variety of health reasons and environment.
Comments or questions about it? Wait a second.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Now we're ready
Managing that for us?
Sure.
for committee nominations.
Let's see. Nominate William Rutchick of 64 Rollinwood Lane and Jim Richardson of 228 Hunters Ridge Road to the Personnel Board.
We don't have to vote on nominations, so we can move to appointments.
Okay. Arthur Schwab of 281 Holdenwood Road to the Conservation Restriction Stewardship Committee for a term to expire May 31st, 2021. And Jane Wells of 51 Chestnut Street to the Conservation Restriction Stewardship Committee for a term to expire May 31st, 2020. Peggy Briggs of 253 Elm Street, Jeffrey Collins of 55 Highland Street, Booja Cookman of 94 Hubbard Street, Jim Giovanni, I got it, of 269 Lawsbrook Road, Pauline Reeve of 429 Williams Road, Steve Merrill of 415 Plainfield Road, Gina Whitfield of 67 Woods End Road, Alice Kaufman of 1615 Lowell Road, and Mike Lawson of 1695 Lowell Road to the Town Manager Search Committee for terms to expire May 31st, 2019.
Any discussion, or do we have a second?
Two of them seem awfully sketchy, I'm not sure. I
You shouldn't talk that way about Steve.
I think we've had a second, so moving right along, all in favor? Aye. Thank you. And now we appoint an election officers.
Let's see, so I move to, move to appoint the election officers as presented in the memo. Should I read them, read the names?
No, I think just the memo dated.
Okay, memo dated October 26, 2018.
Any discussion or a second?
Second?
All in favor? Aye. Now we need to
Move to
adjourn
adjourn
to
to
the
executive
executive.
session for the purposes of discussing land acquisition, White Pond land.
Mr. Chair, can I just say, I was awaiting an opinion from town council, and I do not have that. I can contact them at 5 o'clock, relative to this topic, so,
We don't
you
really
got a
need
meeting next week, so, but I don't have any additional help next week.
Well, we also move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, everyone.